This video is about biodiversity and ecosystems, the incredible story of the variety and interconnectedness of life on Earth. The video will describe how life blossomed over Earth's history, what humans have done to disrupt diversity in ecosystems, and what can be done to help restore balance to Mother Earth and all her inhabitants. Before we get into the history of life and ecosystems on Earth, we will present a simple figure that helps us to understand a basic ecosystem. First, we have the soil, which is home to fungi, bacteria, and other decomposers. These very small organisms play several essential roles in an ecosystem. Among the most important, they provide plants the ability to access essential nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium available in the soil. Above ground, plants absorb CO2, sunlight, and water and use them in a process called photosynthesis to produce oxygen and energy in the form of carbon-based sugars. Some of these sugars are shared with the soil decomposers, providing them with energy to continue unlocking nutrients for the plants. This is a key feedback loop in ecosystems. In a second feedback loop, animals rely on the oxygen, nutrients, and sugars that plants produced. In return, animals breathe out carbon dioxide, pollinate flowers, and spread seeds. Additionally, animals form their own feedback loops when predators eat prey and form food chains that regulate populations and keep ecosystems in balance. The third feedback loop is nature's way of fertilizing soil. As animals digest food and release waste, they are returning nutrients back to the soil, fertilizing it naturally. Similarly, plants enrich the soil through leaf litter and fallen branches. And when both plants and animals die, their remains are broken down by decomposers in the soil, which builds soil and releases nutrients back into the ground that are taken up by plants, and the cycle begins again. With this figure in place, now we'll go into how it took millions of years for Earth's ecosystems to develop. Our journey begins with what scientists have named LUCA, the last universal common ancestor, a single-celled organism that lived deep in the ocean about 4 billion years ago. Each of the almost 10 million species of life on the planet today can be traced back to LUCA. We are all related. It took billions of years to develop more complex, multi-celled organisms, and about 2.7 billion years ago, cyanobacteria emerged and figured out how to photosynthesize to produce energy. For life to move from the water onto the land required the ability to access and combine key ingredients like sunshine, water, and carbon dioxide, along with nutrients like nitrogen that was in the air, and phosphorus and potassium that were locked away in rocks. Before plants arrived on land, bacteria and fungi were already at work on Earth's rocky surfaces. Fungi aren't just mushrooms. Most of their bodies form stringy underground networks called mycelium. They helped form the first thin layers of protosoil while breaking down rocks and unlocking nutrients like phosphorus. Nitrogen was taken from the air. Then, around 500 million years ago, moss-like plants began creeping onto land. They were able to grow by tapping into the nutrients that fungi and bacteria had made available. This marked the beginning of the positive feedback loop and symbiotic relationship between plants and decomposers in the ground. More plant growth supported more fungi and nitrogen-fixing microbes, which in turn made more nutrients available, enabling more plant growth. About 440 million years ago, small insects appeared on land, which added to the soil-creating process. Insects fed on living and dead plants, as well as other insects, and eventually broke down into organic matter. Alongside fungi, worms, and other decomposers, this process slowly built up layers of soil over millions of years. Unlike bare rock, soil held water and nutrients, giving plants a much better place to grow. After a while, the soil became rich enough to support new kinds of plants. Around 400 million years ago saw the introduction of ferns, who had deeper roots and a vascular structure that allowed them to move water and grow taller. Some grew to be 40 meters tall. The ferns were soon joined by the ancestors of spruce and pine trees. The diversification of plants and insects resulted in the formation of increasingly complex early food chains, which included animals. Herbivores fed on plants, and predators emerged to feed on them. When plants and animals died, decomposers broke them down and returned their nutrients to the soil. Then, about 250 million years ago, a spike in volcanic activity and CO2 in the atmosphere triggered an extinction event that wiped out 70% of land species. However, life is resilient, and it didn't take long for new species and new ecosystems to emerge. The age of dinosaurs began soon after, and over millions of years, a new kind of dominant plant life emerged: flowering plants. This eventually gave us flowers like roses and orchids, but also incredibly diverse groups like astarids, which give us potatoes, carrots, coffee and tea, and legumes like peas and beans. Grasses like wheat, corn, and rice and barley are also flowering plants, even if their flowers are tiny and less obvious. Today, 90% of the plants in the world are flowering plants. The emergence of flowering plants had several advantages. Perhaps most important is that they are significantly more efficient at photosynthesis than non-flowering plants like ferns and conifers. This accelerated the feedback loops. More energy from the sun was photosynthesized, which supported more biodiversity in soil and animal life, which in turn helped more plants grow and draw even more energy from the sun. As well, their flowers and seeds allowed for more efficient reproduction and diversification. Most are pollinated by insects like bees and butterflies, and their seeds are often spread by birds and mammals. Over time, this led to a huge variety of species as they adapted to different environments, optimizing the fit and transfer of resources between the different parts of the ecosystem and minimizing the waste of energy and nutrients. Then, about 65 million years ago, an asteroid hit Earth and triggered another mass extinction, which wiped out the dinosaurs and 76% of all species. This opened the door for new kinds of biodiversity and marked the beginning of a new era dominated by mammals, which includes, of course, humans. The earliest Homo sapiens were hunter-gatherers who were very much in tune with the ecosystems and rhythms of the land that provided our needs for food and shelter. Scientists believe that early humankind was especially reliant on grassland ecosystems. Let's take a closer look at one such grassland ecosystem, namely the central grassland ecosystem at the heart of North America, which once covered an area of about 400 million square kilometers. This ecosystem is named for its abundance of grasses, which via photosynthesis provide energy for all of life above and below the soil. For example, the tall grass prairies ecosystem fosters rich biodiversity, with approximately 450 species of grasses and hundreds of other flowering plants, as well as over 2,000 species of insects. Some grasses thrive in droughts, others in wet years, and some regrow quickly after fires, making the system highly resilient. Moreover, these plants support a wide variety of creatures. Insects and pollinators feed on them and help them to reproduce. Larger mammals like deer and bison graze the grasses, aerate the soil with their hooves, and fertilize it with their dung and urine, a vital part of the nutrient cycle. Birds spread seeds across the land, while predators like wolves and eagles keep herbivore numbers in check to prevent overgrazing. When plants and animals die, decomposers return their bodies to the soil, enriching it further. As we have seen, this thriving life above ground depends on life below it. Plant roots form partnerships with fungi and bacteria that unlock nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. A single spoonful of grassland soil can contain up to 100,000 species of bacteria and decomposers. These tiny allies help feed the plants and make it easier for water to soak into the ground. Grasslands were an ideal place to live for humankind, full of food and resources. In return, like all animals, humans exhaled carbon dioxide, aerated the soil, and added nutrients to the soil via their excrements and eventually death. In sum, looking back through time, it is truly remarkable to consider how Earth's landscapes have transformed from barren rock and single-celled organisms to flourishing biodiverse ecosystems. And we are all members of Luca's vast family. Every living thing on Earth is a relative of the great tree of life. Unfortunately, humankind has done much to disturb Earth's biodiversity and ecosystems, including our disruptions to the carbon and water cycles. Scientists tell us that the global food production system is the primary contributor to biodiversity loss, with agriculture threatening 86% of Earth's species that currently risk extinction. So let's take a brief look at what happened to the tall grass prairie grasslands once they were replaced by cities and by farms that use industrial agricultural practices that emphasize monoculture, pesticides, fertilizers, and tilling. Today, less than 1% of tall grass prairie grasslands remains intact. First, consider the emphasis on monoculture, namely the practice of growing one variety of plant on a field that used to have hundreds of different varieties. Today, about half of all cropland in the world is dedicated to one of three flowering plants: wheat, maize, and rice. As well, wildlife has been pushed out of the ecosystem, cutting ecological relationships that once nourished the land. Unfortunately, the resulting lack of biodiversity makes the ecosystem less resilient. For example, a single pest can destroy an entire crop. This makes the use of chemical pesticides necessary, which, unfortunately, harms decomposers in the soil and contaminates waterways and the air, threatening all sorts of species, and has been shown to increase human cancer rates. In addition, growing the same crop year after year depletes essential nutrients from the soil. This is made worse by tilling, a common practice that churns up the soil, breaking apart fungal networks and killing off worms, microbes, and other decomposers. This destroys the symbiotic relationship between life below and above the ground. The ecosystem is left without nature's fertilization, animal manure and urine, leaf litter and fallen branches, and dead plants and animals. To make up for this, farmers add synthetic fertilizers like nitrogen and phosphorus, which create a host of new problems for ecosystems and biodiversity. For instance, less than half of the nitrogen fertilizer applied is actually used by the plants. The remainder contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, soil acidification, and runoff into the water cycle where it disrupts and kills aquatic ecosystems. A similar thing happens when phosphorus fertilizer is used, where the runoff causes toxic algae blooms in lakes and oceans. As a result of such industrial agricultural practices, soil that took hundreds of millions of years to grow is being destroyed in a cosmic blink of an eye, no longer rich in organic matter, decomposer life, nutrients, or the ability to hold water. One study estimated that about 12 million hectares of land, an area about the size of the state of Alaska, are destroyed and abandoned annually because of non-sustainable farming practices. Over time, this has grown to be about 33% of the world's potential farmland. As a result, industry is searching for new land on which to grow our food, which has led to deforestation and to a repeat of the above cycle. Similarly, humankind's desire for meat is reducing biodiversity in the animal kingdom. Today, Earth is home to about 27 billion chickens, 1.6 billion cattle, 1.2 billion sheep, and 0.8 billion pigs. The total biomass of all livestock raised for humankind is 10 times greater than the combined biomass of all wild animals and birds. This has had negative effects on biodiversity because it leaves fewer natural resources and space for other animal species. In the past 50 years, the world's wildlife populations have declined by an average of 69%. In sum, our actions, especially in the past 150 years, have unraveled hundreds of millions of years of biodiversity and ecosystem development. Today, over 1 million species globally are at risk of extinction, much of it driven by economic food systems that provide us food at a low cost in the short term, but are ruining ecosystems that are needed in the long term. Happily, there are many ways we can help to regenerate and strengthen ecosystems and biodiversity. This includes practices that reduce our disruption of the carbon and water cycles, but for now we will focus on changes in agriculture, including the agricultural practices we support with our food purchases. In particular, we need to reduce practices like monoculture, tilling the soil, and the use of pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. And instead, we must employ practices that restore diversity and regenerate the fungi, bacteria, and other decomposers in the soil. A good start would be to embrace permaculture practices. Permaculture is more than a farming technique. Rather, it's a whole systems approach that helps humans design systems that work with nature, not against it. For example, let's take a look at how we could design modern food systems that are inspired by how the tall grass prairie ecosystem fosters flourishing, rather than industrial food systems characterized by monoculture, synthetic inputs, and depleting soil and water. First, what if, instead of vast fields of monoculture crops, we had polycultures, fields with a wide variety of plants that grew in close proximity to one another, including root crops like carrots and potatoes, ground crops like beans, peas, and strawberries, shrubs like blueberries and sea buckthorn, and trees that give us apple and plums, all within the same ecosystem. Just as the variety of plants work together in a tall grass prairie ecosystem, so also each variety of plants in our food system plays a role. Having that diversity makes the entire ecosystem resilient to pests, as a single pest cannot wipe out every plant, and there are actually some plants that deter pests. Additionally, some plants may fix nitrogen. Some may have deep taproots to bring up certain nutrients and retain moisture in the soil. And some are particularly good at adding leaf litter and root systems that feed soil life. These actions add nutrients to soil over time, rather than depleting them. Next, animals could also be integrated in ways that mimic a natural ecosystem's pest and weed control and fertilizing. Ducks can control insect pests without pesticides. Goats can manage weeds without herbicides. Cattle can be moved through pastures and rotational grazing systems that mimic how bison once roamed and fertilized the prairie. Biodiversity above ground nurtures biodiversity below ground, mimicking the original ecosystem. And instead of tilling our fields, we could use no-till methods like cover cropping or sheet mulching that restores soil structure and allow for bacteria, fungi, and other decomposers to thrive. This, in combination with soil amendments like compost, make for an incredibly rich soil life. Research shows that, compared to conventional farming, permaculture does increase biodiversity both above and in the soil. For example, above ground, we see more than 5 times the amount of plant species and a tripling of bird species. Below ground, microbial biomass triples, earthworm populations double, and soils can contain 63% more nitrogen, 41% more phosphorus, and 71% more organic carbon. This shows that humans can strengthen rather than disrupt ecosystems. With this in mind, we can make a difference as consumers by using our buying power to vote for the kinds of food systems we want to support. Purchase food that has been grown in ways that foster biodiverse ecosystems. Visit local farmers markets and get to know and support farmers who use regenerative practices. And if you are a homeowner with a lawn, replace it with pollinator gardens, native plants, and fruit trees suited to your climate. Support biodiversity. In sum, the biodiversity and ecosystems that enable human flourishing have developed over billions of years. They inspire deep awe and a sense that we belong to something greater than us, something sacred, something worth treating with dignity, something worth ensuring future generations can enjoy. As we move away from monoculture and instead increase biodiversity, we trigger a series of positive feedback loops. Our ecosystems regain balance and become more resilient, soils become richer, plants are better able to support life, and the ecosystem becomes more effective at converting energy from the sun into energy that sustains all life. Let's take better care of our home.